Hi, my name's Chris and welcome back to my shop. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I made the top for this stand-up desk. If you want to see that, stick around. Okay, so as we get into the video, I made the entire desktop and all of the components out of one sheet of 5 foot by 5 foot, 12 millimeter Baltic birch. Everything was designed to be constructed out of that portion of a sheet. Of course, everything could be designed a little bit differently, but my goal was to save on materials and costs. So I'd encourage you to go take a look at the plans if you're interested. That'll save you a lot of time, and I've got templates for you to follow as you cut out certain parts. Whether that's something you're interested in or not, I'm going to take you through the build video and you'll get to see how I made the whole thing from start to finish. And then there's a couple key tips on finishing with polyurethane that I also include in the plans, and I'll try to describe them for you as I do them so that you can get a top-notch polyurethane finish for your future projects, whether you build a desk like this or not. I've been using the desk and risers now for about 9 months and I'm really enjoying them.
Many people, I found myself working completely from home during 2020 and my desk was just completely overwhelmed with things, so I decided to build my own. Originally I thought it would be simplest to actually build my own mechanism. Then when I actually got into researching it and designing it, I found that you could also buy a base for $130 on Amazon. And so that's what I decided to do. I just added some wheels to it and used a single sheet of Baltic birch plywood to make the top. So here I am starting out cutting down my sheet into two 25-inch wide strips, and then there's a 10-inch offcut that I'll make the risers and computer stands out of. I just laid everything out, put a bunch of glue on it, spread it out with a putty knife. So here I am spreading all the glue out, making sure I've got a nice even coat of glue in between both the layers. And I just flipped it over, put some clamp cawls on either end to pinch it together. I put some weight in the middle and let it sit overnight to cure. Now the edges from gluing didn't turn out perfect, of course, and there was some squeeze out. So the next thing I did was I just chose the best edge, removed as much of the squeeze out as I could, and ran that along my table saw fence just to trim off the opposite side and give it a nice smooth edge. And then I flipped it around and trimmed the other side parallel, so the top was just under 25 inches wide at finish. At first I tried to protect the edges with some masking tape, but this trick has really not worked for me in the past. I'm not really so sure that it's a trick that actually works at all. I also used a straight edge because my zero clearance fence didn't quite work in this situation. And then I realized that, all of these edges are going to be routed and sanded. And so it really doesn't matter as long as I have a nice straight edge. So the second side, I just drew a line and cut it freehand with the circular saw. So I used a 1/2 inch radius roundover bit on the top side, and I used a 1/4 inch on the bottom side to just give me the profile that I was looking for. I rounded all the corners. Now here I am using a leaf blower to clean off all the dust, and then I sanded everything starting with 120 grit. I sanded it all the way up to 250 or 280 grit. I can't quite recall. So after everything was sanded, I used the air compressor to clean all of the fine dust out of the wood grain. Compressed air works really well for cleaning up a project prior to finish. And now it's time to stain. I just used a can of old stain. I think it was Minwax Special Walnut or Minwax Espresso. I can't actually recall, but it's got a nice dark brown color to it. So here's my staining tip. I always use 2 rags, and of course I wear gloves for solvent-based stains. And the first rag is my applicator rag, and the second rag is my, excess wipe away rag and buffing rag. And so I'll apply with one rag and then spread it out as much as I can with that, keep a wet edge, and then I'll wipe away the excess and kind of buff it in with the second rag. And this always gives me a nice, even, consistent finish without splotches. That's my finishing technique for oil-based stain. So I put the stain on around noon, and in the evening I came back and it was ready for its first coat of polyurethane. I'm using Helmsman polyurethane, and this is the first coat going on. The key to applying polyurethane is not to go too thick, especially in that first coat. There's going to be air that's trapped in the wood that's going to have to escape, and so the main thing is you just keep a wet edge and you tip it off and keep a nice smooth even finish. Don't brush it too much. You're really just applying it to try to get the surface to be nice and level. And so I'm just applying, working my way from one end of the project to the other, lapping it down over the sides. Here you can see the first coat of finished after it's cured. You can still see the wood grain. It's not sealed in all the way. There's a lot of bubbles. You can't quite see them on camera. Next, what I do is in between every single coat, I'm going to use 600 grit sandpaper. And really what I'm doing here is primarily cutting off those ridges and bubbles and any dust that penetrated the surface. I'm just going over the entire thing lightly, cutting everything down so it's nice and smooth to the touch and level, not going too deep so that I don't remove too much of that finish. And then I clean everything up with denatured alcohol to remove absolutely all of that dust from the surface. And as soon as that denatured alcohol dries off, which only takes a minute, you're ready for your next coat of polyurethane. Here's what the surface looks like after sanding. It's a little bit matte and you can't really see any of those bubbles or imperfections. Then I just applied a second coat in the same fashion as the first. And after it cured, you can see the finish is starting to have a nice even tone. And then I just go over everything again with 600 grit sandpaper and wipe it all off with denatured alcohol, and then immediately apply the third coat of finish. By this point, the grain's completely full of finish and the surface is nice and level. And then we're going to go ahead and apply coat number 4. Coat number 4 is cured, and it's hard enough that I can put the desktop on its top. I'm going to flip it over, finish the staining on the bottom. So we're going to let this stain cure for a few hours, and then later on in the afternoon apply that first coat of polyurethane, and then in the evening apply that second coat and let it cure overnight. Now I'm going back in time a little bit here. At one point while I was waiting on one of the first coats of finish to dry, I went ahead and began assembling the frame. The frame was pretty easy. The instruction manual was very well written, and it wasn't hard to assemble at all. I'll just follow the steps. The frame expands to different sizes based on the length of your top, and so I just chose the size that was right for me. And then the lift mechanism rod expands, and then I chose to add casters to mine. It comes with some adjustable leveling feet, but I chose to add 2-inch casters. 2 inches might be a little bit tall because it raises up the seated position, maybe a little taller than you might want, but I went with 2-inch because that's what I had on hand from an old workbench. Okay, so here's the money maker for getting the absolute perfect finish. So you're never going to have a final perfect finish with polyurethane. It's all about what we call rubbing out the surface. So you can do this a couple of different ways. So in this case, I'm going to use 4/0 steel wool with some soapy water, and I'm going to rub over my surface and just cut away any final imperfections. The scratches that the steel wool leaves are too fine to be seen with the eye, and it'll leave behind a great surface that's very smooth to the touch and very pleasing to the eye. I did that on the bottom, and then I flipped it over and did the same thing on the top. And this surface is smooth as glass, and it's got the nice matte sheen that I'm looking for. Another technique, if you don't have any steel wool, you can actually use some craft paper or an old brown paper bag, and it has just enough abrasives in it to cut away a little bit of that top surface and remove any of those imperfections that may have stuck into your file. For the casters, I pre-drilled all the holes and then I used panhead sheet metal screws to attach the casters to the base. Like I said, these are 2-inch casters. They're a little bit taller than I would ideally like, but it works for me, and I just use a taller chair. So once I had all the casters mounted in place, it's time to attach the top. I just used the screws that came with the kit. I put the cord containment tray on the frame as specified in the instructions. This just holds all the excess cords from hanging down and getting in your way. Put the top on, lined it up with my painter's tape marks. And then there were a few odds and ends I had to attach by hand, like the controller box. And I also mounted a power strip directly to the underside of this desk so that I could plug in one cord and have all of my devices that are on top all plugged directly into that power strip. So that's going to do it for this video. Stick with me for build video number 2, where I'll show you how to make monitor stands and risers.
So I hope you enjoyed the video. I do a lot of other projects in a relatively small workspace, so I'd encourage you to check out some of my other videos. It's my goal to help you maximize your shop and your home work environment. Thanks for watching.